Hey everybody, Monarch, this is Pastor Josh. I'm here for your next edition of the Walk Through the Bible. Let's say a quick prayer. Dear Lord, we pray that you be with us right now as we open up your story, your word, open our hearts and minds and our ears to listen to you, to let that sink down deep into your hearts. I pray for your protection to be with all the students and the teachers and their families, Lord. We pray this in Jesus' name. And everybody said, Amen. Wake up the flowers. So the first book of the Bible is Genesis. And we really reviewed Genesis. And now we're coming to the end of Exodus, the second book of the Bible. Genesis means beginnings. Exodus means deliverance. Who is God's deliverer in Exodus? Moses, right. How many plagues were there? Name one. It could be blood, frogs, gnats, flies, livestock, boils, hail, locusts, dark, or the firstborn son. Now, what was God's provision for Israel, for the believers during that last plague? It was Passover, remember? So that death would pass over their door if they put the blood of the lamb on the door. And God led Israel through what body of water? Well, let's look here. Let's get our map going. This is the Mediterranean Sea, the Nile River, right? Here we have the Red Sea. That's the body of water that God led Moses through. And I'm going to add today Mount Sinai there. Over here we have the land of Canaan, the promised land, Sea of Galilee, River Jordan, Dead Sea. Two major rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, flowing into the Persian Gulf. And one more mountain here. Nebo. Mount Nebo. Right. So I'm reviewing the answers on Bible Jeopardy from the book of Exodus. So God led Moses and Israel through what body of water? That would be through the Red Sea. We're not sure exactly where, but they end up in the Sinai Peninsula, there at Mount Sinai. And so God led them to what mountain? Mount Sinai. And there they stayed for a year and they received from God, Moses received from God the what? And it's the law. It's called Torah in Hebrew. And so God gifted that to Moses. It included, there's much more than just what was on the tablets, the two tablets, the 10 Commandments. And do you remember in what two places, this is one of your questions, do you find the 10 Commandments? Two places in the Bible. 2, Exodus 2:0, Exodus 20. And 5, the fifth book of the Bible, Deuteronomy 5, Deuteronomy chapter 5. So remember that, you can do that. And there they stayed for a year, and Moses received the law. And there were 3 parts to the law. Can you remember? Moral, civil, and ceremonial. Moral, what's right and wrong. Civil, how they're going to judge disagreements, the court system. And then ceremonial, the ceremonies that they would have. One including the Passover. They had 3 ceremonies that they were to celebrate. The Passover, the Festival of Weeks. So we just went through the Passover. That's Easter time. And then coming up, what we have is Pentecost. And that was their Festival of Weeks. And then you come around back in the fall they have the Festival of Booths, where they remembered traveling through the desert. And they actually live or spend some time in some tents to remember what it was like to travel in the desert. So they went to Mount Sinai for a year, and they received the law. And then they went directly to the promised land. Only took them 11 days, the Bible said, to go from Mount Sinai to, what is that place called right on the southern edge? It is Kadesh Barnea, Katie's barn. And there, Moses sent in 12 spies, one from each of the tribes. 10 were scared and said, well, it's a great place, but they have walled cities, they're giants. We're never going to be able to live in that land. They'll chase us right out. 2 said God is big enough. The two are Caleb and Joshua, said God is big enough. And so those spies went in for 40 days. Remember that. The 12 spies went in for 40 days. And that's a significant number because after they came out and Israel believed the 10 instead of the 2, and they said to Moses, we're not going to go in. We want to go back to Egypt. And they didn't believe. And so God told Moses, this generation, this unbelieving generation, is not going to enter my promised land. So they then had to wander the desert for how long? 40 years. All right, 40 days the spies were in the land, but 40 years Israel had to wander the desert. Now God took care of them. He gave them manna. Remember the bread of angels that came down? It fell like dew from heaven, and in the morning it would be all around them and they could gather it up and eat. So God gave them bread to eat, and he would give them water. Moses miraculously would hit a rock with his staff and water would come gushing out. He even gave them meat when they asked for meat. And so God always took care of them. Their sandals never wore out. Their clothing never wore out. They lived a full and good life, but he was not going to let the people who didn't believe get into the promised land. You have to believe to get into the promised land. And so they traveled the wilderness for how long? 40 years, until all men over the age of, what age died? All the men over the age of 20 died. So younger than 20, those people were now, after 40 years, they were the next generations of adults, and those others just died of natural causes. And so God waited the whole 40 years until that whole generation had gone. He didn't blame the children, the people under 20, for not believing. He blamed their parents' generation. And yes, he loved them and took care of them, but they could not enter his promised land because they didn't believe. And so after 40 years and after that generation had passed on, then God said to Moses, Moses is still alive, still leading them. He says, go ahead and lead them into the promised land. And so they came out of the wilderness and they came to Mount Nebo. Nebo, right? That's how you remember that. And there on Mount Nebo, Moses climbed up the mountain so that he could talk down. There was an echo through there, and he could talk to all the people because he needed to repeat the law to that next generation so they would understand, before you enter the promised land, let me repeat the law. Let me repeat so you don't make the same mistake that your fathers and mothers made, and so that you would believe. So that book is called what? Does anyone remember? Deuteronomy. Deutero means repeat, and nomi means law. So it was a repeat of the law there at Mount Nebo. Moses repeated the law to that next generation. And there also he spoke to God at the top of Mount Nebo, and God said, Moses, you may look over the promised land, but you're not going to enter it. You are going to appoint your next person in charge, and you have reached your full number of years, and so you're going to die here on Mount Nebo, and the next leader is going to lead the people in. So there, Moses died 120 years old, full of life still. He didn't decline. He was very strong. God blessed him. But his time was up, and he anointed the next leader. What is his name? Do you remember? Shouldn't it be one of those two? And I should say that these two did not die. Caleb, the two that believed, Caleb and Joshua did not die. They continued to live. God bless them like Moses. So all those the people that didn't believe died, but Caleb and Joshua, they survived and they were still living. And in fact, God said to Moses, appoint Joshua your next leader. And Caleb's a great guy, but God had picked Joshua because Joshua had been Moses' aide, Moses' assistant, since they came through the Red Sea. So Joshua had been with Moses that whole time. He went up on the mountain and got the 10 Commandments with Moses. So Joshua was the next in charge, and so he was appointed the next leader. So let's review. We've actually come now and finished through the walkthrough of the first 5 books of the Bible. What are the first 5 books of the Bible? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Genesis means beginnings. Exodus means deliverance. Leviticus talks about the Levites, and remember that tribe, there was 10 tribes, and one of them was called Levi. He was one of the sons of Jacob, and his tribe got chosen there at the mountain to be the ones who would take care of the tent tabernacle and the sacrifices and the ceremonies. So they had lots of jobs. They could take care of the tent. They could take care of the Ark of the Covenant. They would set all that up, but they were also crowd control. Some of them were musicians. Some of them were singers. Some of them would do the animal sacrifices, so they would deal with the meat. They were kind of like the butchers. And some of them were lawyers, and they would help bring justice, the civil system. Some of them were appointed lawyers. So Leviticus talks about the law, and it talks about the role of the Levite tribe, as it also talks about some other things as well. And then Numbers is named Numbers. It goes through this whole story that I just told you. It's part of that story, but it's called Numbers because it begins with the number of troops and the number of people that live in the tribes. And so there's Numbers. And then the last one is Deuteronomy because it's the 5th book, and it is the repeat the law. And that's when Moses repeated the law. So that's the first 5 books of the Bible, and we've walked through those. And that, as I used the word earlier, is called Torah in Hebrew. Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Now, the next thing to happen is Joshua is going to lead the people into the promised land. So Joshua is the 6th book of the Bible. It's named Joshua. And Joshua is a book about victory. Joshua is a book about victory. Now, and here's what you're going to have to remember as well. They came in right here at Mount Nebo. They came into the promised land, and they had 3 obstacles. And this is what I want you to remember. There are 3 obstacles for Joshua and Israel as they entered the promised land. The first one was the River Jordan at flood stage. So they were coming in the springtime. There's mountains up here. There's a Mount Hermon that is a really tall, famous mountain. And there's others. And in the springtime, all the snow from the winter starts to melt. And so all this water flows down into the Sea of Galilee. And then from other mountains, all comes into the low part, which is the Jordan River Valley, and then flows down the Jordan River into the Dead Sea. So at that time of year, the Jordan River is flowing very swiftly. It's big and thick and dangerous and very difficult to cross. So that was their first obstacle, Jordan River at flood stage. And what did God do? Does anyone remember? Well, he repeated really what he did down here in the Red Sea. He opened up the Jordan River. What he told Joshua to do was to have the Levites who are in charge of the ark, and they never touched the ark. They had long poles to hold the ark. And he said, send them in front of the people with the ark. And as soon as their feet touch the river, the water will wall up on both sides, and there will be a dry place in the middle. And so that's what happened. Joshua sent them first, and then God opened up the river, and they stood with the ark at the bottom middle of the river in that dry spot, and they stood there while all the people of Israel passed through. And Joshua said to each of the 12 tribe leaders, grab a large stone from the bottom of the river. And they each did. And so when they got to the other side, and then everyone was through, and then the Levites with the ark walked across. And as soon as they got across, the river then started to flow again. And there they piled up those 12 stones as a memorial, as a reminder of what God did at that point. So that was the first obstacle that they had entering the promised land. Does anyone remember the second obstacle? Well, right on the other side of the Jordan was a big walled city to do just this, to keep people out. Now, at other times of the year, there was a ford, which is a shallow area through the Jordan River. And so any of these other countries traveling around the Fertile Crescent could try to enter in right there. So they had this big, huge walled fortress, and it was called Jericho. That's right. And so when they crossed the river and came there, they were right there, and they were facing Jericho. And so what they did was they camped there, and Joshua sent 2 spies actually into Jericho. And you can read about that story in Joshua. They meet a lady named Rahab who helps them, who actually believes. And she says, I know your God is very powerful, and everyone is afraid of your God. And they heard that the spies were there, and they went after the spies, but she hid them on her roof and then let them down out of her window outside the wall of Jericho so that they could escape. And they came back to Joshua and gave him the news that everyone's scared there, and they know that that our God is very, very powerful. And so Joshua was praying and thinking about how he was going to do this. How could he defeat this great walled city? So he was walking probably at night, and he found himself in a little bit of a forest in the trees, and then all of a sudden he looked up, and there was an angel warrior standing before him with a large sword, an angel of light. And he, of course, was like, wow. And he said, are you a friend or foe? Are you on our side or against us? Because, boy, I'm in trouble if you're not on my side. And the angel said, neither, but as the commander of the Lord's army, I have come. And so Joshua, and he said, take off your shoes, because you are now standing on holy ground. Just like when God spoke to Moses through the burning bush, this is Joshua's moment of God really speaking to him. And so he sees the commander of God's army, this mighty angel, and he realizes that God is really on my side. And then it was revealed to Joshua what to do, how to defeat this walled city of Jericho. It was clearly going to be God's work, because he didn't have a group of great warriors, and they didn't have all the means of defeating a walled city. They didn't really know how to do that and didn't have the means to do that, but God was going to do it. And so do you remember what they did? So God told them each day for 7 days, just walk around, basically put the Levites first in the ark, and then have the people, the warriors, the families would stay back in the tent, but then you have the fighting men, and then you have the musicians, more Levites in the rear. And so you just walk around the city and then go back to your camp. So they did that. But then on the seventh day, they walked around the city 7 times. And on the end of the 7th time, at a certain moment, they blew trumpets and they all screamed. And at that point, God just had the walls crumble down in Jericho. God defeated Jericho. It was not Joshua or any of the Israelites. God did it. But God also saved Rahab and her family, the girl that helped them there. And she was safe, and she actually became, she then lived with the Israelites from then on. See, because she believed, and that's what really makes the difference. She believed, and she did something about it. And so that was the second obstacle. So we have the River Jordan at flood stage. We have Jericho, and then we have Ai, simply spelled with those 2 letters, Ai. And it was just this little city outside of Jericho. And in fact, at first Joshua had said, let's just send a small group of soldiers over there. That village, that little city won't be a problem. But they came back defeated, and they said, they beat us. We had to run for our lives, they wouldn't we could not defeat them. And Joshua realized, he said, now what's happening? Because God told me that if I obeyed God, then wherever I set my foot, he would give me that land. And I believed what God said. So what happened? And he thought, we must have disobeyed God. And what God said was, when they came into Jericho, he said, I will defeat Jericho for you, but you do not take for yourselves any of the things in this city, any of the loot, any of the valuable things they would find, jewelry and clothing and, things that were of value there. And God said, no one take anything for themselves. And what happened was there was a man named Achan, and Achan was Achan. And he took some gold and he took some clothing for himself. And what happened was Joshua realized we must have disobeyed in some way. And so what he did is he actually started to, he had a way of like rolling dice and giving him a number. And so he said, okay, which tribe was it? And he rolled to see which tribe it was. And so it became, okay, it's the tribe of Judah. Okay, which family within the tribe? Okay, so he rolled to see which family. All right, of that family, which household is responsible? And so he rolled dice again, and it comes to this guy Achan. And so he brings Achan forth in front of everyone and said, Achan, have you disobeyed God? And then Achan confessed and said, yes, I saw some gold and some fine clothing, and I took that for myself and hid it in my tent. And so at that point, they all realized, we are going to have to obey God completely. And so then God said, then they realized, okay, this is full obedience, and God allowed them to then go, and they were able to defeat Ai, and Ai gave itself up and gave its land to Israel. And so those are the 3 obstacles that Joshua had. And Joshua is a book of victory. And so as long as he was obedient to God, which he was a very faithful man, everywhere he went in this promised land, God would give him victory. And there's a statement at the end of the book of Joshua that I want you to remember. And it's chapter 24, verse 15. And it is, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. We'll see you next time.